everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you to our Sustainable Fashion panel at the Fair Trade Conference. My name is Jessica Andrews, and I'm the Deputy Fashion Editor at Bustle. And we have an amazing panel planned for today. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Ayesha.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayesha Barenblat, and I am the founder and CEO of Remake. We are a for women, by women movement that's focused on making fashion a force for good. As someone who spent 15 years on the inside of the fashion industry, I realized that we needed to provide everyday people with actionable ways to buy better, to support sustainable brands, and to embrace a sustainable fashion lifestyle. So that's what we do as an advocacy-based nonprofit. I'm so excited to be here with amazing women on this panel and look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Ayesha. Cameron, do you want to go next?
Hi, everybody. My name is Cameron Russell. I have spent the last 17 years working as a model, and I call that my day job. My night job has been being an organizer of artists and cultural makers, and in the last 4 years, really intentionally organizing within the fashion industry. I'm the co-founder and I'm one of the lead organizers of a group that is currently called Model Mafia, but we're taking name suggestions. We are hundreds of models in about a dozen different countries organizing for sustainability and justice in the industry and beyond.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Rachael.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachael Wang. I am a stylist and a creative consultant and also the creative director of this year and last year's We Wear Fair Trade campaign. So lucky to have 3 of our wonderful participants in that campaign here on this panel, and I'm so excited to be able to chat with you all today. So first off, I just wanted to introduce the We Wear Fair Trade campaign and just explain a little bit about how the campaign worked this year. So each year, Fair Trade USA honors the anniversary of the fatal Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh and joins in the larger conversation around transforming the fashion industry with its We Wear Fair Trade campaign. Since the start last year, I've had the privilege to creative direct and style the shoot featuring Fair Trade certified factory-made clothing. For this year's campaign, we focused on women in fashion. We produced a video interview series and lookbook called She Wears Fair Trade with prominent female advocates, 3 of whom we're lucky to have here today. Our intent with the campaign is to spotlight the lives impacted by our garment choices and showcase the impact that's possible through Fair Trade certification. The campaign officially debuts April 20th, but I'm excited to share with you a first look at the campaign video today before we dive into our Q&A.
I have seen firsthand when I was working in the sweatshop. I was only 9 or 10 years old, and I was working 12 to 15 hours a day, and nobody knew about it.
Women make up 80% of the fashion industry, and although we are rarely in charge, we do the bulk of the labor, and we also are the bulk of the consumers.
By being present, we hone in the work of Black and brown indigenous people globally to completely disrupt the mainstream movement, which has made our voices invisible.
Fair trade clothing is a step in the right direction to ensure dignity and the well-being of the women who make our clothes.
The most important thing people can do is shop with intention.
We exist to disrupt the whitewashing of sustainability across all spectrums, especially within agriculture, fashion, and wellness.
I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an advocate for equality, and most important, I'm a human being.
Thank you. That's so powerful. And it was such an honor to be a part of the Fair Trade Lookbook. So thank you for sharing that with us, Rachael.
So just say that if you're interested, you can join the conversation on social media at #WeWearFairTrade. And you can also visit fairtradecertified.org/WeWearFairTrade on April 20th to see the full campaign and to find out ways to get involved.
Awesome. Awesome. So I want to dive right into the conversation. So I have a question for everyone. Obviously, we're all very passionate about fair trade, but can you explain why it's so important to you to support fair trade, not only in your career, but in your personal lives? We can start with Ayesha.
Absolutely. So, Jess, as I said in that beautiful video, which was so fun to make with the amazing women in this panel, I support fair trade because it's a way to assure that the people that are making our clothes, who are mostly women, are safe. The stipend that the fair trade commitment provides is really important because a lot of garment workers subsist on very little. I also think that the label on fair trade is really helpful for everyday people to wear their values and to be able to support brands that are doing better.
100%. What about you, Cameron?
So I've been using this. I have adopted a phrase that I heard Shonda Rhimes use. She said she was having her year of yes. So this is my year of yes around everything like climate and justice related. And I think everybody should have a year of yes, where literally anytime someone gives you a choice where you can make a good choice or a less good choice or a bad choice, always make the good choice. And fair trade is a good choice. And we have to be in the year of yes, because I don't think you have to be an expert in trade or in climate science to understand that we have to do everything we can to build a just and sustainable future. And I think we're seeing, now, and I know it's on everyone's mind, that we are as vulnerable often as the least vulnerable person, the most vulnerable person among us. And fair trade is helping challenge that and change that in the fashion industry.
That's so true. And what about you, Rachael?
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with both what Cameron and Ayesha said. I mean, ultimately, I believe the factory workers should be able to work in safe conditions and earn a sustainable living. And it's very simple. And I think that needs to be done.
So like I mentioned, it was really a great experience shooting the lookbook together. And one of the things we focused on this year is women, and especially garment workers in the industry. Ayesha, can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to remember garment workers in our conversations around sustainability and fashion and how we can better support them?
Yeah, absolutely. Fashion is unique as an industry in that it's really powered by women. Whether you think about the designers, the stylists, the models, the people who are marketing us fashion, the people who are designing our clothes, and often forgotten in this conversation are the people that make our clothes. Officially, there's about 75 million women worldwide that make our clothes, often in communities where there isn't a lot of access to other jobs. And she's the backbone of this industry, yet she's hidden from our collective consciousness. If we just look at the data, here's an industry that's valued at $2.5 trillion, right? The top 8 fashion brands made over $1 billion in just 1 year. And then when we look at the makers of our clothes, she's making less than half of what we would consider a living wage. What that simply means is she's deciding between food and medicine, 1 meal or 2 meals. And so I often wonder, how is it that an industry that's mostly run by women, that's supported by women's wear, because we know that's the sales that keeps this industry profitable, has so many issues up and down the supply chain that remain pervasive. It's interesting having Cameron on the call. When I think about models and the makers of our clothes, the issues are very similar. Short-term contracts, pervasively low wages, really long hours that she's working, an average of 12, 13, 14 hours, and then a lot of sexual harassment, violence, and assault, because even though the industry is run by women, it remains controlled by men. And this is why we are really a girl-powered movement, unabashedly a for women, by women movement, to say we all as a collective have to come to the table to demand a voice, to demand a seat. And as long as this girl boss is forgotten at the other end, whether we think about this from our model platform or our stylist platform, or you just from a, writer, to bring her back into our collective consciousness, because she makes our clothes and yet she's just nowhere to be seen.
No, that's so true. And my next question is for you, Cameron. Speaking of, as you said, we all have different roles in the fashion industry, and you are a veteran in the modeling industry. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how the luxury space specifically has evolved in terms of sustainable fashion, and whether you're seeing an enduring change or more like a marketing strategy or a trend approach among these brands.
I definitely think we've seen a huge shift in the last, 12 months, seeing, most of the big conglomerates make pretty public sustainability commitments. I don't know if anybody knows how rich or deep or effective those commitments are going to be, because we are in such an early stage. I do think one path forward that is not currently in action but will need to be addressed is really looking to the incredible innovation and leadership that's coming from the margins. So fashion and fashion media is owned by very, very few conglomerates, but there are people who have been practicing sustainability for decades, if not centuries, and tapping into, for example, artisan practices, people who are actually in tune with, when do crops grow? How do I rotate a crop? How do I, harvest correctly? How do I, support my family with this work? That knowledge has to come in. And we can look at folks like Custom Collaborative in Brooklyn, thinking about how to train women to start their own fashion businesses and own them. That really tips the scales in terms of like who is in charge and who gets to earn money from this. So consumer with an eye to sustainability should also be thinking about like who is making my clothes and where can I buy them, and innovation like that is definitely in the margins. And also folks like doing regenerative agriculture work. There's so much potential and possibility that hasn't been brought into the big thinking at conglomerates, and I don't know that they necessarily will be able to turn around their, business models yet. And unfortunately, I think a lot of what we've seen is people who care less about sustainability and more about sustaining business models. And that has to change simply because we don't have any other options. And I think another lesson from, sorry, I see my internet connection breaking. Another lesson from right now is possibly that the things that we think are unchangeable can actually change very, very rapidly. So, being aware of the experts, being aware of the people doing this work, moving those folks to the center is so important right now.
You're absolutely right. It's really crucial. It's really crucial right now. And Rachael, I wanted to talk to you because I had such a great experience on set with you shooting the lookbook, and I was so impressed by the variety of clothes you were able to pull. And working at Bustle, inclusivity is so important to us. And one of the biggest sources of feedback we always hear is that people feel if they are plus size, that there's no room for them in the sustainable fashion movement. So what would you say to a shopper who's looking for a size range and is not really finding it among sustainable fashion brands? What advice would you give her?
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that concern. And I think across the board, there's not enough options, diversity of options in general for a full size range. And I definitely think there's not enough responsible and ethical brands that are prioritizing size inclusivity. But I hope that the more that we use our voices and vote with our purchases, the companies will work to meet our demands as consumers. In the meantime, I think you were able to see a few of the pieces that I was able to pull. There are some brands that are doing a great job that I would recommend, like J. Crew and Madewell have denim up to size 37. Prana does great basics and workout clothes up to size 3X, and Mar Hoffman, my personal favorite, for special occasion pieces and swim up to size 3X. I mean, that's not all sizing, but we're, making small steps in that direction. I think that the more demand that's there, the more opportunities there will be and more variety there will be for more sizing.
That's absolutely true. I love J. Crew and Madewell, so I love that you pulled a lot of them. And it's great to see more options in the market. So thank you. My next question is for Ayesha. Your organization Remake is igniting a conscious consumer movement and is really inspiring to watch. So how can women like me and viewers who are watching get involved? Like, what steps can we take to support that?
As a small nonprofit, I love that question. Thank you. So I have 3 ways that you can support us. The first is give us a follow on Instagram. It's Remake Our World. And one of the things that we do very hard on social media to provide is timely facts, breaking stories so that we can hold the fashion industry accountable, but also tips and tricks on how to embrace a sustainable fashion lifestyle. You know, we know, as Cameron pointed out, our earth cannot sustain all the buying that we're doing. And so we really think about this from a, how can you create a sustainably curated wardrobe, but are also buying less and better. So, you know, following us on Instagram, I'd say, is the first way to dip your toe in the water. The second is, if you are really interested, join our ambassador community. We are a fast growing network of women up and down this country and increasingly globally. It's makers and models, social justice warriors and artists that all come together really with a hope of joy and inspiration, but also sharing tips and tricks on how we can use our voices and our wallets to advocate for change in the fashion industry. So if you're interested in joining our ambassador community, we're unabashedly mostly women. We don't let men out, but they just don't happen to apply as much. Drop us a line at info@remake.world. And then finally, you know, for those of you who are really interested in getting to know the women who make our clothes, we do a Made In series. You can see our docuseries, our stories on remake.world. That's our platform. And if you can, donate. You know, I think all of us are going to be hurting now, and we as a nonprofit do the very hard work of speaking truth to power, but we take no money from the fashion industry because we sincerely believe that that's how our transparency work gets done. That's how we're able to really give our seal of approval to brands that are doing more good in the world. So I think there's lots of ways to get involved. And as Rachael said, it's only when we come together as community and speak up as a collective that we're going to be able to push for change.
That's so great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually want to switch things up and ask a viewer question. I have one for Cameron. So how do you feel sustainability and ethically made apparel is currently understood and supported in the fashion industry among models and fashion influencers? And how do you see it evolving in the future?
So I think there's a couple of different things going on. There are some folks who I have seen models and influencers make actually commitments to only work for sustainable brands. And I think that is a bold move. If you can actually sustain yourself and your livelihood that way, that is pretty amazing. I also think, just like brands themselves, influencers and models who are also brands are recognizing that it's trendy and that actually consumers and consumers are demanding sustainable content and sustainable fashion. So I think there is also a reaction to that sort of trendiness. And the last piece is, I actually think, kind of like I spoke on before, if you expand your understanding of who is a model and who is an influencer and really take a big swath of creative producers and cultural makers and muses, I think we're seeing that there is a ton of innovation when we think of fashion not just as consumption, but as culture and as community. And that is, culture and community are wonderful sustainable alternatives and sustainable options for what fashion can be. Just now, you know, in the last week, we've been seeing, I've seen a couple drag queens do live shows on Instagram Live. That is sustainable fashion, right? You know, people who are super into the repairing movement and are showing the incredible things that they're doing at home, that is sustainable fashion. There are all these other things which I think, once we broaden our understanding of just simply consuming a single brand, supporting a brand, that will come to mean sustainable. We're seeing a lot of that.
No, that's so true. And I definitely have been catching some of those lives, and very entertaining, but then also, like you said, an important stride in sustainable fashion. So Rachael, I want to talk about the idea that sustainability and ethics in fashion are trends, right? We know that sometimes brands will take a movement and capitalize on it in order to sell us goods, but maybe not be as committed to it genuinely as we'd hope. How can we ensure that the brands we love are making commitments that are just genuine and not about selling a campaign, but really something that they believe in as part of their brand ethos?
It's It's a really important thing for us all to be thinking about right now, I think, because there's a lot of information, and like Cameron said, it's trendy. So, and I think that honestly, until the government steps in to mandate ethical production, unfortunately, the burden falls on us, the consumer, to have to do the research, whether brands are holistically and authentically incorporating sustainable practices into their business model. And that's just takes a lot of time and effort and energy and work, and a lot of people don't have that extra time. But, you know, if we do have that time, we can check the brand's about page to see if they implement fair wages, low impact fabrics, circular production, which incorporates recycling and waste elimination at the design stage. But, you know, the amazing thing is, like, when in doubt, you can definitely look out for seeking the seal, looking out for the green and black fair trade emblem, which guarantees working conditions are being held to rigorous standards and that workers are being represented and have additional financial capital to improve their livelihood. So obviously we're all here today to promote the growth of fair trade as a certification, and more brands that participate in that program, the more clear it will be for consumers to be able to find brands that are ethical.
And if I were just to take a second, just, you know, I think what Cameron and Rachael said is so important, that for us as activists who've been beating this drum forever and ever, it's very heartening to see mainstream fashion, whether we think about it from a fashion magazine standpoint or celebrities talking about it. But what's going to be very important is that it's not a trend and a moment, but rather it's mainstreamed. And, you know, one of the things that we do see is a lot of greenwashing. So brands essentially co-opting the movement. It's very confusing for an everyday shopper, all this proliferation of labels, right? It's organic cotton. Is Lysol a good thing? What about silk? You know, it says that it's made in the USA. Does that mean it's ethical? And so that's why we consider ourselves, you know, very much a watchdog. I think absolutely, as Rachael said, if you see the fair trade label, wonderful, you know, but if you don't, what are you to do? And so on our site, we do have a sustainable brand directory, because this information becomes very technical very quickly if you're thinking about climate, water, waste, and human rights. And so until the government steps in, I do think that it's important to be looking at watchdogs like us to say, here are brands that are doing better, that you are able to support, but also to remember that simply supporting good brands when we are producing 100 billion units of clothes a year is not going to get us out of this crisis. So it's also about how we can buy less.
Right. Buying less is so important. I'm really glad you brought that up. And I want to talk to you as well just about the fast fashion supply chain. And I think that's a good segue, because I've personally seen my habits shift to where I'm not picking up items just because they're trending. I'm thinking more smarter and intentional about my purchases. And one of the reasons I've done that is just learning about the horrors of that garment workers faced in the fast fashion industry. So could you speak a little bit to that, like the working conditions that these garment workers are facing, and why fast fashion particularly is really harmful in that realm?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what we have seen is not just fast fashion, but ultra fast fashion now, right? You think about Misguided and Boohoo, and in the world of Amazon Prime, you know, if you want that ugly sweater for your Christmas party, or, you know, that sort of whatever hokey thing you're going to buy, you'll do one click and then it's there at your doorstep the next day. And so I think with the rise of e-com and some of these very, very fast fashion brands, what you have is a rise in disposable clothing. And what people don't realize is the direct correlation between very fast means that her hours are longer. It means that, you know, she's working a 12, 13, 14-hour day, likely dealing with the ergonomic impacts of sitting in front of a sewing line for so long. You know, very cheap directly correlates to how little she's paid. A lot of fast fashion sort of follows the countries where clothes are cheap and where wages are so low that they can really exploit workers. So, you know, a $5 t-shirt very much represents the exploitation of women that's embedded in there. Not to mention the fact that with fast fashion, you've got essentially disposable clothes that after a few washes are going to fall apart, right? And where do we ship those clothes? Back to those communities to be in those landfills to erode their soil and their water quality. So from a planetary boundary as well as a human rights standpoint, fast fashion is inherently violent to the bodies of Black and brown women. And that's something that we really try and get the industry to pay attention to. I know that this is a great conversation to get us out of our COVID-19 reading and coronavirus. But I know that the pandemic is on everyone's mind. And if we were to just take that example as how fast fashion impacts women's lives, what we've been hearing from colleagues over the weekend is, especially as brands have started to shutter stores and close down retail operations, the orders have started to be canceled or put on hold. And so what that means is factories either have paid for the material, they have to pay the women, but now they don't have that cash flow coming in. And so what that means is that a lot of workers who don't have safety nets, who don't have access to good health care, if they were to start to get sick, are also not going to be paid. And so this is a sort of very transactional relationship that fashion, but particular fast fashion, has with the makers of their clothes. And, I think the bottom line is it is inherently kept an entire generation of women trapped in a cycle of poverty.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's really eye-opening to learn how coronavirus is impacting these garment workers specifically. So thank you. And I think it's something that we have to keep in mind, in the industry, and be more thoughtful about our purchases, because they're really impacting people in significant ways. So thank you. Cameron, I wanted to ask you, going off that, if we could dream about what the future would look like in the sustainable fashion industry in the next 5 to 10 years, like what would be the ideal progress you'd like to see?
Wow, that's like a huge question, which all of us would need to weigh in on with our own expertise. For me, it would look like when we do buy new things, we are buying them from artisans, ideally directly. When we buy things that are not new, they are local, and we also pay people locally to repair our clothes if we can't do it ourselves. It would look like the fashion industry becoming about, selling events, making space for culture to bloom, and that becoming the service that it's providing. I think it would look like, to get to that spot, bringing more people to the table. And for, I was listening to Ayesha thinking about how I have read that lots of these high fashion brands produce at similar, if not the same factories that the fast fashion brands produce at. And one difference is that those brands actually have more capacity in some cases to change what's happening. And so I think it would look like high fashion brands really leading and diverting all profits to a better way forward, to finding a better way forward, to investing in startups and alternatives, and maybe not growing. I think we're just in a time that's going to require so much transformation that we just have to see massive change and really massive leadership, especially from folks who this system is privileging right now, to move resources, move power as quickly as possible.
No, absolutely. So I want to go back to you, Rachael. I have another reader question. And this I really love because I've been seeing this in my own kind of shopping habits. But so they're asking, what are your thoughts on the pre-loved and the secondhand trend? This particular viewer is 57 and never imagined Macy's would sell thrift until they saw the thredUP section there last month. And, what are your thoughts on how we can incorporate vintage finds into our wardrobe, and especially for people that are looking to save money as well?
I mean, I definitely think that buying secondhand is the second most sustainable way that we can buy new fashion. The first most sustainable is where we already have. And I think that it's amazing that we have these big companies promoting and making aspirational the concept of wearing secondhand clothing, because recycling and giving more life, more years to one garment so that no new virgin materials need to be extracted, et cetera, and everything that goes along with the production line. That's amazing. But I've actually personally been a secondhand shopper my whole life. I always thought it was really fun to dig for special piece, one-of-a-kind pieces. I always really like to wear special things that helped me to stand out. And I think that shopping secondhand is a great way to really like hone in on your personal style and your own aesthetic, and to not necessarily let a store or a brand or fashion magazines dictate to you what style means or looks like. That you can just go into a store and like be drawn to a fabric or a color or, you know, a shape. And I think that there's something like inherently really fun about discovering something that's essentially one of a kind, because there's going to be one of them in that store. And I just think that it's an amazing way for people to be able to get that feeling of kind of mixing up and adding to their wardrobe. You can bring in one new piece. It can be much more affordable than buying something new. And even honestly, like with fast fashion, you can get things really cheap as well, but it's, you know, more often than not comparable to a fast fashion price point. And more often than not as well, clothing, especially like technically vintage clothing that's 20 years old or older, is generally made better quality. So those pieces will last longer, and then should have a longer life in your wardrobe if you wish to pass that on as well, if you want to donate when you're done using it.
Such great advice that I will be taking. So thank you for that. And I have another question for you, Ayesha. I actually have a viewer who wants advice for talking to their peers and friends, specifically when they're arguing that buying sustainably is too expensive or too difficult. What are some talking points that we can give this viewer when she's having these kinds of conversations with her friends?
Yeah, I love that question because it's so important to have empathy when we're having these types of conversations. You know, I can be that person where maybe with one glass of wine, start rattling off the horrific facts of the fashion industry. And then my husband will be like, you'll have no friends, so please stop, you know. So I think it's sort of approaching first by doing, and, you know, what you have on. If you have something on that's wonderful, as Rachael said, something that's one of a kind, and someone approaches you, it's like, oh my God, you look so wonderful. Where did you get that? And you can then weave it into the conversation around, well, actually, this is a thrift find, or, you know, this is a vintage find. I think one of the reasons we think that sustainable fashion is expensive is because we've been used to internalizing the oppression of garment workers, not paying for the externalities to the environment, right? But I think for people, especially when you're thinking of shrinking wages right here in this country, having that conversation can be very difficult. Clothes shouldn't cost $10, $15, $20. They just cannot, if we were to think about the amount of water, the amount of cotton, the amount of labor that goes in. But I think one of the things that some of the influencers in our community have managed to do is, by buying sustainable brands, proven how much they've saved from a money standpoint. So in the summer, we run a no new clothes campaign. So we all take a pledge to buy nothing. And in the spring and fall, we're only adding a few pieces that are sustainable. And what people quickly realized was, wow, those hauls that I would get from fast fashion, it feels good initially, but in the end, it ends up costing me more money. So I think, you know, really walking the talk and looking great and then approaching the conversation would be one tip, knowing that sustainable brands last longer. And so they are definitely in that way saving money over the long term. And then not forgetting the secondhand market. I think it's still early days for rental to be figuring out sustainable, but I do think that's has to be a part of the conversation as well.
Right. I love that you mentioned rental too, because that's something I've really participated in. And I've been, you know, floored not only by how much money I've saved, but how much I'm not now contributing to the environmental impact that fashion has. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider. Thank you. So fair trade fashion, right? We are all here because we're passionate about it, but I do find that a lot of readers think that it's difficult to find it in the market. We know that that's not the case. It's actually more ubiquitous than you would think. So I'd love for everyone to speak to where they personally find fair trade fashion so that we can make it a little easier for people that are watching, who want to participate in this but don't always know where to look. So we can start with you, Rachael.
Sure. Probably, I mean, it's hard because my perspective, I'm so used to, after working with fair trade, I know the brands that are fair trade, so it's hard for me to understand from the point of view of not necessarily knowing. So I can just list off a few of the brands that I love that are fair trade. But I know that you can definitely find it REI, which stocks many, many brands. But some of my favorite fair trade brands are Patagonia. As I said before, J. Crew, Madewell are like pretty available online. They have stores all over. Obey is a really fun brand as well for kind of like streetwear, skate culture kind of style. Also Athleta, Outer Known, Pact and Aventura are great as well for basics. So that's a nice long list. And those are all available online as well as retail.
A lot of my favorites in that list, so definitely write that down. What about you, Cameron?
You dropped out for part of your question, but I think you're asking like where to find fair trade or how to shop that way.
Exactly. Like where can they find fair trade brands, viewers who want to participate in sustainable fashion and support, but are having difficulty finding it?
So I have been trying before I buy anything to research it if I'm not going to go secondhand. So if I need a new jacket, I found out when I was about to buy a jacket that it was actually just a horrible harvesting method for the down. So that like sent me into a whole research about how to get the right down. And so I have been trying to be really thoughtful before I make any kind of purchase. Most recently I needed like a new suit because my suit was really on its last legs. So I was very thoughtful and researched online before even going to a store to try anything on. So I guess that's my advice is don't buy very much. And one way you can really avoid buying very much is that you force yourself to research first.
That's so true. And buying less, I mean, I see that as a theme during this conversation, but it's just so important. So I love that you brought that up. And Ayesha, what would you say for people who are looking for fair trade, how they can find it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the brands that Rachael mentioned, I love. You know, it's interesting when you put breathable cotton like Pact on your body, you realize you can never go back because it also just feels so good compared to some of the polyester blend. You know, being here in the Bay Area, I think we were joking about this earlier, Patagonia is sort of our uniform because, you know, it's the weather changes and it's so it's hard to know whether you go from hot to cold. So definitely, I think, you know, I know the lookbook is coming out. There's ways to support fair trade brands through that. But much like Cameron, I'm a very much, you know, shop in my own closet. You know, can I buy it secondhand? I have been using the Rent the Runway subscription for the last 2 years now. And it's really helpful because I do a lot of speaking events and it's a way for me to look fresh on stage, but not have to buy something. In fact, I had got this Ted Baker dress, hoping we'd all be together in Pasadena, which didn't happen, you know. So for me, rental is also definitely an answer. And then I love to shop in my sister's closet. She doesn't like it as much, but I do.
Those last two things are totally me. I mean, this is her Rent the Runway too. And sorry, Sabrina, if you're watching, I have all of her things, my sister. So yes, can definitely relate, but great advice. And I have another reader question that I'm just going to pose to the group. And if anyone wants to answer, feel free. But I thought it's really important to add to the conversation. So if you're asked, any thoughts on how we can work with our government to promote sustainability in the fashion industry? Any policies? So does anyone want to speak to that?
So I can take a little bit of sort of a, you know, wonky approach to what the history has been here. You know, even the sort of made in and what location our clothes come from was relatively the sort of closest we've come to regulation in a long time. It was actually under the Clinton administration when Robert Reich was the labor secretary, where they said, well, we have to at least put, you know, made in Cambodia, made in China. But that sort of traceability is really helpful for us as activists because we then know where the clothes are coming from and are able to connect with the garment communities and have an understanding of what the issues are. Unfortunately, it looks like, at least in the American context, it's going to be very much at a city and state level because, you know, we don't have the sort of openness to be thinking about environmental or human rights standards with the federal government. I think for a lot of cities, and New York and San Francisco in particular have been looking at this in a hard way because they have to deal with so much of the textile waste and how expensive it is to the city that we're going to see regulation more in that way, you know, much like the plastic bag tax. Should we be taxing, you know, fashion brands when the clothes are essentially being dumped and the cities are then having to figure out what to do with it. So I think there are ways for us to be involved, at least in the current political context, more in a local city politics. And then, depending on election, not getting political here, but just thinking about the EPA for now is essentially gutted. So I think it's a lofty to be thinking about more federal level regulation. But what I would love to see is actually protections when it comes to environmental protections and human rights protections written into free trade agreements.
Right. Thank you for that. It's so helpful. This question I think is best for you, Rachael. So we have a viewer who says that when they're looking for fair trade sustainable clothes at stores like Madewell or J. Crew, how do they tell which clothes are sustainable? And should we assume that most of the clothes made from these brands, some of the brands that you mentioned, are fair trade, or is it worth doing a little bit more investigation?
That's an awesome question. So at this time, not all items sold by those brands are fair trade. Each of those brands sew in the seal onto their garments. So they're inside the inner labels of like the waistband of the jeans, for example. If you're shopping online, you should be able to, I'd have to go and go on specifically the website, but you can search fair trade denim, I believe, on there is some language specifically that differs according to what brand it is, but if you go into the store, you can definitely ask an employee which items are fair trade. And then if you're searching online, you definitely should be there should be a tab or when you're narrowing your search to fair trade denim, and that'll definitely narrow down. And then you can also narrow that search by size if you're looking for a certain size, etc. So.
And I will say, Jessica, it's so important that we ask these questions because a lot of brands are essentially testing market demand to see whether or not people want fair trade. Unfortunately, a lot of marketing departments shy away from putting a lot of signage because only a capsule or a particular piece of the wardrobe, of the product is fair trade and the rest isn't. So I think they're sort of afraid of the backlash with that. But the more we support it, the more we show market demand, the more we're able to get brands to start to integrate it beyond the test of the capsule into more of the product SKUs. So, definitely ask.
Advice. Oh, sorry. I was saying I love that. It's such good advice. And I have another viewer question that I think would be good for you, Cameron. They're asking, what's your advice for when you get gifts from brands that don't have ethical, sustainable practices or are a part of the fast fashion industry? What advice would you give to someone responding to those gifts?
Ayesha, you could weigh in as well. I don't know that all parts of all fast fashion is necessarily bad. And I think we do have to look at, like Ayesha was speaking about empathy. I think there's definitely space for a lot of empathy in this conversation. I know a lot of people, when they graduate from college, that first interview outfit is from a fast fashion brand. And that is what's accessible. People with children need accessible winter wear. And so I think there is definitely room for empathy. And there is actually room for fast fashion brands doing it right some of the time. I guess, it's such a complicated conversation, I think, in this political climate, because it's almost like we're facing sort of a hierarchy of challenges, of issues that we have to address. And so I think it is in part about picking our battles. And even as someone who works in fashion and who is an activist within fashion, I still think that we all have to really be on fossil fuels and the banks that invest in fossil fuel R&D. So as much as I think we need to see people change their practices within fashion, there are other targets that I think we need to focus most of our energy on. So before you ruin the relationship with your aunt that sent you that jacket, take time taking your money out of Chase Bank. That's a good step in my view.
I think we lost you on the very last line. If you just
instead of ruining that relationship with your aunt who sent you a jacket from wherever, I would say save your difficult conversation to take your money out of Chase Bank. Pick your battles.
Yes. I was so glad you repeated that, 'cause that's hilarious. So lastly, I want to bring it back to you, Rachael, just because I had such a great experience working on the lookbook, and I know these ladies did as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about your experience working on it and really what inspires you to continue, because this is now your second year, right? Working on the lookbook, and what people can expect when it comes out.
You know, working with Fair Trade on the We Wear Fair Trade campaign and this year She Wears Fair Trade campaign is always just really a highlight of my year, because it allows me to combine my passions for style and fashion with social justice. And there's really not that many opportunities that I get in my chosen career path to do that. So it means a lot to me, and it carries me through and gives me like power and energy to take with me, you know, ever after. But it also allows me to connect and collaborate with women that I admire deeply. I get to meet women that I otherwise probably wouldn't have the opportunity to, or the reason to necessarily. And it brings us together in a way that we can collaborate and talk. And, you know, I just make such amazing connections in that way. This year, we really wanted to highlight some of the incredible female advocates that inspire me through the work that they do. And I just wanted to give them the space and platform to be able to talk a little bit about what fair trade means to them. So this year we did a video directed by Daniel Navetta. We also had portraiture done by a dear friend of mine, Cristel de Castro, who took such beautiful portraits. And ultimately, it's just about bringing these people together, talking about why fair trade matters and why it's important, and just being able to prioritize issues that matter to us within the space of fashion. And I'm just super excited for everyone to see the full campaign when it comes out on April 20th.
Yes, I'm so excited for that too. I think for me, you know, and I may have said this in the video, but fair trade really is the future. And it's so great for us to be a part of an organization that is so forward thinking and so responsible ethically when it comes to the environment. It truly is an honor, and I've learned so much from each of you guys. I really appreciate the knowledge that you shared, and you just being so willing to like answer reader questions and the questions that I've had. And I really appreciate everything you do to make fashion more sustainable. So thank you. And I hope everyone enjoyed. This will be available, I think, for you guys to rewatch. And also look out for our video, April 20th. It's going to be amazing. And the lookbook as well. Thank you for joining us.